Have you ever wondered, why is it that when life gets too easy, people tend to grow weaker? Do you remember the last time you pushed yourself to do something truly difficult? Just to challenge yourself, not because anyone made you. And what if I told you that real strength is never forged in comfort, but in the moments when we willingly step into hardship? Would you believe me? Rule 1. Training through voluntary hardship. When I was younger, I thought happiness meant living in comfort, avoiding struggle whenever possible. But as I've grown older, I've realized too much comfort is like a soft pillow that lulls our willpower to sleep. It makes us forget the pride that comes from overcoming something hard. I have a friend named Michael, now in his 60s. 10 years ago, he went through a serious health crisis. His doctor told him plainly, if he didn't change his lifestyle, he'd be dependent on medication for the rest of his life. Michael started small but intentionally hard, taking cold showers every morning, fasting for 24 hours once a week, and walking nearly 2 miles to the market instead of driving. At first, people laughed and said he was making life harder than it needed to be. But over time, I saw him grow stronger and sharper. Michael told me, "The hardships I chose to face are the reason I'm no longer afraid of the ones life throws at me unexpectedly." As someone who has studied Stoic philosophy for years, I know that Seneca called this voluntary hardship. This wealthy Roman would sleep on a hard floor and eat meager meals for a few days each month, not to punish himself, but to remind himself, if tomorrow I lose it all, I will still be fine. It wasn't self-inflicted misery, it was mental training, an invisible armor against the fear of loss. Think about it. If you've never willingly endured the cold, how will you react the day the power goes out in the middle of winter? If you've never experienced hunger, how calm will you be if life forces you into scarcity? Voluntary hardship is our way of rehearsing for the worst-case scenarios, so that when they do arrive, we don't panic. I once asked a group of older students, if every day were easy, would we still learn anything new? An elderly woman in her 70s smiled and said, "No, every great lesson in my life started with something hard." She was right. No one grows stronger by always taking the easy road. Modern science backs this up. Studies show that when we voluntarily face challenges like cold exposure, intense exercise, or fasting, our bodies activate powerful adaptive responses. They release hormones that boost endurance, improve mood, and even increase resilience to stress. In other words, hardship doesn't just strengthen your will, it strengthens your body, too. I know that by the time we're in our 50s, 60s, or beyond, many of us have already faced more than our fair share of life's hardships. But here's the difference. This is hardship you choose. The kind you willingly walk into won't drain you. It will grow you. You don't have to start with anything extreme. Just pick one small challenge each week. Maybe it's putting your phone away for 3 hours and diving into a difficult book. Maybe it's walking farther than you usually do, or going to bed and waking up an hour earlier. Maybe it's eating the simplest meal you've had in years, just to feel gratitude for what you do have. Remember this: every time you voluntarily step outside your comfort, you're rewriting the story of who you are. You're proving to yourself that you're not chained to habit, comfort, or fear. And most importantly, you're sending yourself a powerful message. I run my life. I'm not a victim of my circumstances. So I want you to ask yourself, what challenge will you choose this week? Not to prove anything to anyone else, but to remind yourself that beneath the thin shell of comfort, there's still a strong, Resilient soul, just waiting for you to wake it up. Rule 2. Live as if you were about to die. Have you ever woken up in the morning and thought, I've got plenty of days ahead of me? Have you ever put off something important because you told yourself, I can do it tomorrow? And what if I told you that the morning you just woke up to could be the very last sunrise you'll ever see? Would you live differently? I remember my friend Jack, he's 68, now once told me a story. He had a sudden heart attack while gardening. In an instant, he realized every plan, every goal, every I'll get to it later could vanish in a heartbeat. Jack survived. But from that moment on, he completely changed the way he lived. He told me, I don't let the important things slip away anymore. Every day I ask myself, if today was my last day, what would I do? That's the spirit of memento mori, remembering you will die. Not to be morbid, not to be afraid, but to wake up. As someone who's lived more than 6 decades, I've seen it happen far too often. People who seemed strong, vibrant, and full of life, suddenly gone. Sometimes it was a tragic accident. Other times it was an illness discovered too late. And those moments have taught me a hard truth. None of us are guaranteed a tomorrow. When you're young, it's easy to believe you have all the time in the world. But by the time we reach our 50s and 60s, we know better than anyone time is finite, and it only seems to move faster with each passing year. So if there's something that matters, do it now. Call that friend you haven't spoken to in years. Say thank you to someone you love. Finish that project you've been carrying in your heart for far too long. One of my students, Linda, once told me she had always dreamed of learning how to paint, but she put it off for more than 20 years, telling herself she'd do it after retirement. When that day finally came, her eyesight had weakened, and her hands weren't as steady as they used to be. She told me, if I had started sooner, I could have painted a picture for my granddaughter. Linda's story stayed with me for a long time. It made me wonder how many dreams die not because we can't do them, but because we waited too long to even start. Psychology backs this up. Research from Stanford University found that when people truly feel that their time is running out, they tend to live with more meaning. They prioritize the relationships that matter most, focus on contributing value, and waste less on meaningless distractions. In other words, death isn't just the end of life. It's a mirror that reflects back what's truly worth living for. So here's a simple exercise I want you to try. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, ask yourself, if today were my last day, how would I live it? Write down 3 things you'd want to do, or 3 people you'd want to speak to, and then do them. That same day, you'll find that time suddenly feels more precious, and you'll move with more urgency toward what truly matters. The Stoics believe that urgency is one of life's greatest teachers. When you know your time is limited, you let go of petty grudges, you stop caring about gossip, and you focus on the core of what matters. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." It may sound cold, but it's one of the most powerful reminders not to waste your life. I remember one evening during a talk, a 72-year-old gentleman stood up and said, "I used to think I had at least 20 more years to live. But now I understand I don't have 20 years. I only have today. Repeat it until I run out of days." That line has stayed with me ever since. So if there's something you need to say it. If there's something you need to do it. If there's someone you need to forgive, then forgive them. Live as if your time is running out. Because the truth is, it is. And when you live with that awareness, every morning becomes a gift, every hug becomes a treasure, and every breath feels like a miracle. Rule 3. Burn down your comfort zone. Have you ever noticed? The calm, easy days often leave the fewest. Marks on your memory? Do you remember the last time you did something so difficult your heart pounded and your palms started to sweat? And what if I told you, it's in those uneasy, unstable moments that you meet the truest version of yourself? Would you believe me? Many years ago, I had a neighbor named Robert. He retired early at 55, and his days fell into a perfectly predictable routine. Morning coffee, lunch at the same diner, afternoon news, evening reruns of an old TV show. At first, Robert loved the ease of it, but eventually he began to feel his life was shrinking. No new stories to tell, no excitement to wake up to. He told me, I realized the comfort zone isn't safe at all. It's a cushioned cage that locks every door to the world outside. The Stoics knew this thousands of years ago. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He wasn't only talking about the obstacles out there in the world, he meant the invisible walls inside of us. The habits that are too familiar. The routines that are too comfortable. When you stay in your comfort zone for too long, you don't just stop growing, you start shrinking. Just like a muscle weakens when it's never used, so does your mind, your will, your spirit. The more you choose the easy path, the less capable you become of handling the hard one. And when a real challenge finally appears, you realize you've grown too weak to stand your ground. I once met Linda, a student in her 60s who joined one of my Stoicism classes. For 20 years, she worked the same job, saw the same small circle of people, and never tried anything new. When she retired, she didn't know how to spark excitement in her life. Her comfort zone had stolen her curiosity and her courage to explore. We started small, signing her up for a dance class, getting her involved in a local volunteer group. Within months, her eyes lit up again. She was overflowing with energy. She told me, "I feel 10 years younger just because I dared to try something new." The comfort zone is like a sealed room, perfect temperature, soft lighting, nothing unexpected. Sounds pleasant, right? But imagine living there for the rest of your life. No spring or winter. No challenge to measure your strength. No surprises to wake up your mind. Life in the comfort zone is just a loop. Until one day you realize you've wasted the most precious years of your life. Science backs this up. Psychologists call the state of stepping outside your comfort zone optimal anxiety. That sweet spot where the pressure is just high enough to make you focus, learn, and grow. Too much anxiety, and you're overwhelmed. Too little, and you sink into stagnation. The fascinating thing is your personal growth always lives just beyond your comfort zone. So, how do you burn down your comfort zone? It doesn't mean you have to take reckless risks. It's about choosing challenges that make you slightly uncomfortable, but still possible. If you're afraid of speaking in public, start by sharing your opinion in a small group. If you're used to walking in the park, try hiking up a hill. If you've never gone anywhere alone, take a short solo trip. I once made a rule for myself. Every week, I must do at least one thing that makes me uncomfortable. This week, it might be attending a meeting where I don't know a single person. Next week, it might be trying a completely new sport. Each of these experiences is like a brick, building strength and confidence, one layer at a time. The Stoics didn't seek out pointless danger. but they never hid from challenge either. They understood that long-term comfort is the sleeping pill of the will. To truly live, you have to be willing to step outside, even if it's just one small step at a time. Remember this: no one ever discovered the strongest version of themselves while sitting in a recliner with the TV remote in hand. That version of you is out there, where the air is a little colder, your muscles are a little sore, and your heart is beating just a little faster. And it's out there, where life is truly lived. This week, I want you to ask yourself, what's keeping me in my comfort zone? And what's the smallest step I can take to get out of it? Don't wait for the right time. Create the time. Because if you don't step out on your own, your comfort zone will shrink until it becomes a prison. Rule 4. Let go of the echoes of the past. Have you ever been going about your day, and suddenly an old memory hits you, like a scar you've forgotten about that suddenly starts to sting again? Have you ever lain awake at night, replaying a mistake from decades ago, and feeling the same guilt as if it had happened yesterday? And what if I told you that these echoes are invisible? Chains tying you to a person who no longer exists. Would you want to break them? I remember one autumn evening, a few years back. An old friend of mine, Sarah, called me. Her voice was tight, almost trembling, as she said that every time the weather turned cold, she thought of the day she lost her dream job. It had been 15 years, and her life now was stable, even good. Yet she still carried this deep belief that she wasn't good enough. I paused for a moment before telling her, Sarah, the woman who lost that job all those years ago is not the same woman talking to me right now. You've moved on. You've grown. But you've kept that ghost living in your house. Memories, when held too long and fed with regret, turn into ghosts. They're not real anymore, but they haunt every step you take. The Stoics understood this well. The past doesn't exist anywhere except in our minds. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." The outside event is gone, but if you keep replaying it in your head, you're the one keeping it alive. The danger is, the more you repeat the same old story, the more you cement an identity built on failure and pain. And one day, without realizing it, you start believing that you are that story. I've seen this in so many older adults. Some still say, "I'm the one who was betrayed," or "I'm the one who failed," as if that's their legal name. The truth is, what happened back then is just a chapter in your book, not the whole book. The problem is, too many people keep rereading that chapter so much that they never turn the page to the next one. One of my students, David, now in his 70s, once lost a large sum of money in a bad investment. For nearly 20 years, he avoided every new opportunity that came his way. In his mind, one phrase kept repeating, "I'm someone who can't manage money." We worked together for months until he finally realized that story was only true for the David of 20 years ago, not the David standing in front of me today. When he accepted that truth, something shifted in his eyes. He started learning to invest again, this time with caution, clarity, and a plan. Neuroscience has an interesting insight. Every time you recall a memory, your brain rewrites it, almost like saving a new version of a file. This means if you recall a memory with regret every time, you're actually reinforcing that negative emotion, making it harder to let go. But if you change your perspective, if you see it as a lesson rather than a failure, you're also overwriting the memory with a lighter, more empowering version. Letting go of the past doesn't mean erasing it. No one can do that. Letting go means refusing to let it define you anymore. A Stoic would say, we cannot change what has happened, but we can decide how to see it today. This requires a habit. Every time an old memory resurfaces, pause and tell yourself, that person no longer exists. I am who I am today. Repeat it until it becomes instinct. I know there are memories so painful you think, there's no way I can let this go. But think of it like this. The past is a heavy suitcase you've been dragging down the road. You can choose to set it down. At first, it might feel empty, strange, like you've lost a familiar part of yourself. But then you'll feel lighter, breathe easier, and move faster. Here's a small exercise. Tonight, write down 3 things from your past you feel you haven't released. For each one, add this sentence. This happened, but it doesn't define me. I choose to move forward. Keep that paper somewhere you can see every day, until those words start to sink deep into your mind. The Stoics believe that true freedom begins the moment you stop arguing with the past. When you replace "why did that happen" with "what will I do today?" you take back control. And you realize no one is holding you prisoner except yourself. So starting today, every time an echo from the past creeps in, tell yourself, that person is gone. I live for the present. And little by little, that ghost will fade, not because you've forgotten, but because you've stopped feeding it. Rule 5. Discipline over feelings. Have you ever promised yourself you'd start exercising, but the next morning it rained and you thought, one day off won't hurt? Or set a goal to read every day, but ended up scrolling on your phone instead because you weren't in the mood? What if I told you, the moments when you least feel like doing something are actually the most important times to act? Would you believe me? When I was younger, I let my feelings dictate everything. If I felt motivated, I'd give it my all. But if I was tired or not in the mood, I'd find excuses to delay. The problem is feelings change constantly, like the weather. If you let your life be steered by them, you'll never have the stability to go far. The Stoics understood this well. They believed we should act based on values and principles, not moods. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If it is not right, not do it. If it is right, do it. Everything else is irrelevant." He didn't say, do it when you feel like it. He said, do it because it's the right thing to do. I have a friend named George, now 65, who used to be a Marine. He told me that in the military, no one waits until they feel ready to act. They train in the rain, in the cold, when they're exhausted, because discipline doesn't care about feelings. That habit ended up saving him many times in civilian life. When his wife got sick, he still kept his workout schedule, still went to work, still took care of his family, not because he wanted to, but because he knew it had to be done. Feelings are great at convincing you to take it easy. They'll whisper, "You've done enough," or "Tomorrow's fine," or "You don't have the energy today." But here's the truth. If you only act when you feel motivated, you'll accomplish a fraction of what you're truly capable of. Psychology backs this up. Short-term emotions usually push you toward immediate comfort, while discipline focuses on long-term gains. When you train discipline, you're teaching your brain to value the bigger reward over the quick hit of instant gratification. I once worked with a student named Mary, 58 years old, who wanted to write a memoir, but kept putting it off. She only wrote when she felt inspired. After 3 years, she had only finished 2 chapters. We agreed on one rule. Every morning, write 500 words, no matter her mood. 6 months later, she completed her first draft. Mary told me, "I realized inspiration usually comes after I start, not before." The Stoics would tell you this. Disciplined action is non-negotiable. You set the schedule and follow it like a promise to yourself. This is especially important in midlife and beyond. When energy and health need consistency, something bursts of inspiration can't sustain. Try this exercise. Pick one thing that matters to you. Maybe it's walking for 30 minutes a day, reading, meditating, or learning a new skill. Then do it at the same time every day for 30 straight days, no matter how you feel. Don't judge the results yet. Just focus on keeping the promise you made to yourself. After a few weeks, you'll find it becomes a habit, and your emotions will lose their grip on whether you show up or not. I know there will be days when you're tired, busy, or unmotivated. But on those days, every small action is worth twice as much, because it sends a powerful message to yourself. I don't let my feelings run my life. Remember, discipline isn't about forcing yourself to suffer. It's the art of arranging your life so that what matters most always comes first, no matter your mood. And here's the beautiful part: when you live with discipline, you actually feel freer. It sounds like a contradiction, but it's true. Because you're no longer at the mercy of emotional winds. You know where you're going, and you trust yourself to keep moving, rain or shine. So this week, I want you to ask yourself, what matters so much that I'll do it, even when I don't want to? And start today. No waiting for inspiration. Waiting for the right time. Because if you wait, you'll be waiting forever. Rule 6. Take absolute responsibility. Have you ever caught yourself saying, "If only things had been different, I would have"? Have you ever blamed someone else, the times, or plain bad luck when life didn't go your way? And what if I told you, the more you blame, the more you hand over control of your life to someone else? Would you be willing to stop? I remember a conversation with John, a 62-year-old man who went bankrupt after a bad investment. For years, he told his story the exact same way. "I failed because the market tanked, because my partner broke his word." When I asked, "If it's all their fault, then what have you done to change it?" he went silent. That's when it hit him. If all the blame belongs to someone else, then so does the power to fix it. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." In other words, no matter what life throws at you, the final responsibility lies in how you choose to respond and act. I've met people who carried bitterness for decades, convinced that one event in the past ruined their lives. But here's the truth: that event was only the starting point. It's the choices they made afterward that determined who they became. When you keep blaming, you keep living inside the old story, where you're a powerless victim. Taking absolute responsibility doesn't mean claiming fault for things that clearly weren't your doing. It means that, whatever happened, you still own the choice of what to do next. If a storm tears the roof off your house, that's not your fault. But fixing it, or letting it rot, is entirely on you. I'll never forget Martha's story. She was 59 when her husband passed away, and she spiraled into depression for 3 years. She would often say, "My life ended with him." Then one day, she heard a line on the radio, "No one else can live your life for you." She told me it felt like a slap in the face. Slowly, she began taking small steps, morning walks, learning new recipes, joining an art class. She didn't erase her grief, but she took responsibility for the days she still had left. Psychologists call this an internal locus of control, the belief that you are the primary influence over your own life outcomes. Research shows that people with this mindset are happier, more successful, and less prone to depression. Because when you take responsibility, you also believe you have the power to change things. On the flip side, if you always chalk everything up to fate or other people, you fall into what's called an external locus of control. The belief that you're just being carried along by the current, with no real say in where you end up. That mindset leaves you more dissatisfied, more frustrated, and often with less drive to live fully. The Stoics chose the first path. They didn't wait for the world to become fair before they started living. They acted no matter the circumstances because they understood this truth. Responsibility is power. When you take responsibility, you take back the keys to your own life. I often give my students a simple exercise. Write down 3 things in your life right now that you're unhappy with. Then, for each one, answer this question: how have I contributed to this situation? The answer might be uncomfortable, but it's also the doorway to change. If you're unhappy with your health, maybe you haven't been consistent with exercise or your diet. If your relationships feel strained, maybe you haven't been communicating honestly or listening enough. Seeing your role in the problem isn't about self-blame. It's about recognizing the part you can change. I get it. By the time you're 50, 60, or beyond, you've already lived through your share of unfairness. But if you want to live the rest of your life on your terms, you can't let the past or other people keep their hands on your steering wheel. Blaming might give you a momentary sense of relief, but it also means you've handed over the right to steer. So starting today, the next time you catch yourself about to say, "if only," stop, replace it with, "what am I going to do next?" That's the question of a driver, not a passenger. Rule 7. Measure by values, not by praise. Have you ever found yourself walking on air the whole day just because someone paid you a compliment? Or lying awake at night, replaying a single piece of criticism, even if it was just an offhand comment? And what if I told you, every time you let your emotions rise and fall with other people's opinions, you're handing them the keys to your happiness? Would you still want to live that way? I remember a story about an old friend of mine named Helen. She was an incredibly talented painter, but every time she had an exhibition, her mood lived and died by the reactions of the people walking through the gallery. If there were plenty of compliments, she'd light up and dive into her work with renewed passion. But just a handful of critical comments, and she'd put her brushes away for weeks, sometimes months. One day, Helen asked me, "How do I stop letting other people's words control me?" I told her, when your sense of worth comes from within, no one can take it away. But if it comes from outside, anyone can steal it. The Stoics saw this clearly thousands of years ago. Epictetus once said, "If you want to be free, don't let yourself be dependent on things beyond your control." Other people's opinions are beyond our control. They might praise you today and criticize you tomorrow, not because you've changed so much, but because their perception has. If you live only to chase praise and dodge criticism, you'll end up a puppet to the crowd. You'll choose what's popular over what's true to you. I met Richard, a 67-year-old former CEO, who told me that for most of his career, he made decisions based on what will people think, instead of, does this align with my values? When he retired, he realized he'd been living by someone else's script for far too long. And what he regretted most wasn't the criticism he received. It was all the things he didn't do because he was afraid of being criticized. Living by your values means putting your principles above the need for approval. If you believe honesty matters, you speak the truth even if it costs you popularity. If you value your health, you say no to an all-night party even if people roll their eyes. If you believe in kindness, you help someone without expecting recognition or applause. Psychologists have found that people with intrinsic motivation driven by their own principles and beliefs tend to be happier, more consistent, and less stressed than those who rely mainly on extrinsic motivation like bonuses, titles, or praise. External rewards are fickle. Internal motivation, built on deeply held values, lasts. I once advised a student named Laura, 55, who was starting her own business. Pick 3 core values and measure your success against them, not against the applause you get. She chose honesty, creativity, and perseverance. Every time she faced a tough decision, she didn't ask, "What will people think?" but "Does this align with my 3 values?" A year later, her business was thriving, not just financially, but emotionally. She told me she felt more at peace than ever because she knew she was finally living in alignment with herself. The Stoics would remind you, praise or criticism is just noise from the outside world. It can't touch the deepest part of who you are unless you let it. And if you want to live a truly free life, your measure has to come from within. Try this exercise. Write down the 3 values that matter most to you. Then, for 1 week, every night, ask yourself, did I live in alignment with these values today? If the answer is yes, that's success, whether anyone saw it or not. When you live by your values, something interesting happens. Praise becomes a nice bonus, not your lifeline. Criticism turns into feedback, not a verdict. And you begin to enjoy the freedom of someone who knows exactly who they are, what they're doing, and why they're doing it. So this week, I want you to try living just 1 day without seeking approval. Do something kind without telling anyone. Finish a hard task without posting it online. You'll see for yourself true value doesn't need the spotlight. It's already shining from within. Rule 8. Empty your cup. Have you ever argued with someone, and deep down, you knew you weren't entirely right, but you kept defending your point just so you wouldn't lose face? Have you ever passed up a chance to learn something new, simply because you thought, I already know enough? And what if I told you? It's that very fullness of ego and preconceived ideas that's the biggest barrier to your growth. Would you be willing to set it down? I remember a story from my early days of teaching Stoic philosophy. One of my students, Thomas, 63, had been a chief engineer at a major company. He came to class with a quiet confidence, maybe even a touch of pride that he'd seen it all and had nothing left to learn. Whenever I introduced a new concept, he'd respond almost instantly, I know that already. But one day, we talked about forgiveness, and Thomas went silent. It turned out he had been carrying resentment toward an old friend for over 20 years. When I shared a different perspective on forgiveness, he just sat there, quiet and still. For a long time. At the end of class, he said softly, maybe I never really understood forgiveness. In that moment, it was as if he set his cup down for the first time and allowed someone else to pour something new into it. The Stoics warned us long ago, no one can learn what they think they already know. Epictetus often reminded his students that in order to learn, we must first admit we don't know, or at least, that we don't know enough. But that's hard to do, especially when we've lived many years, achieved certain milestones, and built a life we're proud of. Problem is, A full cup can't take in more water. A mind already packed with old beliefs, fixed opinions, and absolute certainty has no room for new ideas, fresh experiences, or deeper truths. I once worked with a woman named Linda, 58, who ran her family shop. When I suggested she try selling online, she shut the idea down instantly. My customers like to shop in person. I know them well. But a year later, after sales had dipped, she gave it a try only to discover that 40% of her new customers came from the online store. She laughed and said, "Turns out, I didn't know them as well as I thought." It was a perfect reminder that when we dare to question our own assumptions, we open the door to possibilities we couldn't see before. Emptying your cup doesn't mean tossing out every skill or lesson you've ever gained. It means staying humble enough to ask, what if I'm wrong? What if there's a better way? That question doesn't weaken you. It keeps you adaptable, open, and ready to grow. Psychologists call this a growth mindset, the belief that skills and knowledge can improve over time, and that it's okay to admit you don't have all the answers. On the other hand, people with a fixed mindset often see being proven wrong as a threat, so they close themselves off from new learning opportunities. The Stoics chose the growth mindset. They welcomed challenges, corrections, even criticism, because they knew each one was like rinsing out the cup, clearing away the residue so it could hold fresh water again. I often give my students a simple exercise. Every day, pick one thing you've always believed to be true, and then look for reasons it might be wrong. It could be a habit, a political opinion, or a work routine. You don't have to change your mind, but you will expand it. And with that, you start breaking down the quiet arrogance that can hide inside us all. One of the most liberating things about truly emptying your cup is this: you no longer feel the pressure to know it all or to always be right. You free yourself from the exhausting performance of certainty. Instead, you become a lifelong learner, and every single day becomes an opportunity to enrich your mind. I remember a 72-year-old gentleman in one of my classes who said, "When I was young, I thought I had all the answers. Now I realize the real value is knowing how to ask the right questions." That one sentence perfectly captured the spirit of emptying your cup. So this week, I want you to try something. Pick a topic you think you know inside and out, and then find someone who sees it completely differently. Listen not to debate, but to understand. Who knows? You might just find a hidden gem in that freshly refilled cup. Rule 9. Master your inner dialogue. Have you ever caught yourself saying, "That's just the way I am, people like me don't change"? Or maybe you've whispered to yourself, "I'll never be good at this," and then never tried again? What if I told you that the sentences you repeat in your head are the threads weaving together the person you eventually become? Would you want to change them? I think of James, a former student of mine, now 61. For most of his life, he believed he wasn't the kind of person who could succeed in business. That thought was so ingrained that any time a new opportunity came along, he would reject it without even considering it. When I asked, "Who told you that?" he gave a half smile and said, "No one. I just kept telling myself that for years." The truth? That voice wasn't fact. It was just a story he had repeated so many times. He accepted it as destiny. The Stoics understood that the mind is the most important battlefield you'll ever face. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." That doesn't just apply to fear, it applies to the way we define ourselves. Every story you tell yourself, whether it's "I'm not good enough" or I will see this through no matter what, becomes the blueprint for your actions. I once worked with Maria, a 57-year-old woman who wanted to lose weight and improve her health. But every conversation we had began the same way. I've always been the lazy type when it comes to exercise. I told her, if you keep telling that story, you'll keep living it. So together, we rewrote it. I'm learning to love my body by moving it every day. At first, she felt awkward saying it out loud, almost like she was lying to herself. But after months of repeating it and acting in alignment with her new story, she no longer saw herself as the lazy type. She became the kind of person who worked out 5 days a week without needing to force it. Neuroscience has proven that the human brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity, meaning neural connections, change based on what we repeat and believe. Every time you tell yourself something about who you are, you're reinforcing the neural pathways that support that belief. Change the story, and you change the brain's map of who you are. Mastering your inner dialogue doesn't mean denying reality or pretending everything is perfect. It's about being intentional with the stories you choose to feed. You can acknowledge a weakness while still aiming toward change. Instead of saying, I don't know how to do this, say, I don't know how to do this yet. That one word yet opens an entirely new path forward. The Stoics would remind you, you can't control every thought that pops into your head, but you can challenge it, question it, and rewrite it. Just like a general revises strategy after losing a battle, you can rewrite the mental scripts that are holding you back. I often give my students this exercise for 1 week. Pay attention every time you tell yourself something limiting. I'm not smart enough. I'm too old to start over. Write it down, then rewrite it in an expansive way. I'm learning more every day. I have valuable life experience to start over. Repeat your new story until it becomes second nature. I know that at 50, 60, or beyond, many people think their identity is fixed. But the truth is, your mind can still change, and your life can still take a completely different turn if you dare to change the words you speak to yourself. No one else is going to write your new story for you. That's your job. So this week, I want you to ask yourself, what story in my head has expired but is still running my life? And if you rewrote it, how would it begin? Maybe with something as powerful as, I am becoming. Because when the story changes, you change. And when you change, your entire life begins to move in a new direction. Rule 10. Choose an environment that shapes you. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to let yourself slide when you're around lazy people? Or how just sitting in a quiet coffee shop can make your mind flow with new ideas? What if I told you, the environment you choose is quietly shaping the person you're becoming? Would you be willing to change it? I'm reminded of Mark, a 64-year-old former colleague of mine. After retiring, he spent most of his time hanging out with a group of old friends. They drank beer almost every afternoon, retelling the same old stories and complaining about the state of the world. One day Mark told me, I just don't have the motivation to try anything new anymore. But at my age, maybe I don't need to. I looked at him and realized it wasn't that he lacked motivation. He was simply living in an environment that kept him locked in his old self. The Stoics understood the power of environment. Epictetus advised his students, avoid the influences that pull you away from the path you've chosen. You might have strong willpower, but if you're constantly surrounded by negative conversations, unhealthy habits, or tempting distractions, that willpower will slowly erode. Science backs this up. A Harvard study found that, on average, we become more like the 5 people we spend the most time with, matching their habits, their attitudes, even their income levels. This isn't superstition. It's the effect of behavioral contagion. Without even realizing it, you start to think and act like the people around you. I once worked with Angela, a 59-year-old woman who wanted to live a healthier lifestyle. Her biggest struggle? Her husband and closest friends loved indulgent meals and didn't exercise much. We agreed she needed a new circle to support her goals. Within weeks, she joined a morning walking club, people who encouraged each other, shared healthy recipes, and celebrated small wins. In just 3 months, she lost 15 pounds, but more importantly, she felt energized again. She told me, "Once my environment changed, I didn't have to fight so hard to stay disciplined anymore." Choosing an environment that shapes you isn't just about choosing friends, it's also about choosing your space and your activities. If you want to focus on writing, create a quiet workspace with no phone or TV. If you want to learn a new skill, join a class or a community where everyone is working toward the same goal. The Stoics would remind you, you can't control everything in this world, but you can choose where you place yourself. Even the best seed won't grow in barren soil, and people are no different. If you want to become a new version of yourself, you have to plant yourself in the right soil. I give my students this exercise. Write down your 3 biggest personal growth goals right now. Under each goal, list whether your current environment is helping you reach it or holding you back. If it's holding you back, think of a change you could make. Switch your workspace, adjust your daily schedule, or connect with people who inspire you. I know that at 50, 60, or older, we have long-standing relationships and deeply rooted habits. But sometimes, growth requires the courage to adjust the environment around you. That doesn't mean abandoning old friends. It means choosing how you spend your time and space, so that positive influences have room to shape you. Remember, strong willpower is good, but the right environment is even stronger. When you put yourself in a space and social circle that naturally encourages growth, change feels easier, more sustainable, and less like a constant battle with yourself. So, this week, ask yourself, who and what surrounds me every day? Are they pulling me forward or holding me back? If the answer doesn't sit well with you, it's time to reset the stage of your life. Rule 11. Turn small actions into big wins. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by a big goal, so much so that you wanted to give up before you even started? Have you ever told yourself, "I'll do it when I have more time," and then months, maybe years, pass with nothing changing? And what if I told you, the secret to changing your life isn't in giant leaps, but in small, steady steps you take every single day? Would you believe me? I remember the first time I committed to improving my health after turning 50. In my head, I pictured myself running 5K every morning, hitting the gym for an hour, and eating a strict, clean diet. But after just a few days of trying, my body was loudly protesting. Instead of quitting, I took another route. Every morning, I walked for just 10 minutes. After a month, I bumped it up to 20. 3 months later, I started jogging lightly. And a year after that, I was running 5K every day, just like I'd imagined at the start. But I got there through small, pressure-free steps, not by forcing myself into an all-or-nothing sprint. The Stoics understood the power of accumulation. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Perfection is achieved by many small acts." He didn't say big acts, but small ones, because they're sustainable, they carry less pressure, and they're easier to maintain over time. I once worked with Susan, a 62-year-old woman who wanted to write her memoir. She kept thinking she needed several free hours to write, which meant she never wrote anything. We agreed she'd write just 200 words a day, a short paragraph she could finish in about 15 minutes. 6 months later, she had a completed manuscript. She told me, "I never imagined these little chunks could turn into an entire book." Science has a name for this: the compound effect. Just like putting small amounts of money into savings and watching it grow with interest over time, small habits accumulate too. Each repeated action builds on the last, creating results far bigger than you expect. And the reverse is true each time you procrastinate or skip, it compounds in the opposite direction. The key is that your small actions should directly connect to the person you want to become. If you want better health, your small action might be drinking 1 extra glass of water a day, or taking a 5-minute walk after dinner. If you want to be calmer, it could be 3 minutes of deep breathing every morning. If you want to be more knowledgeable, it might be reading just 5 pages before bed. The Stoics would tell you, you can't transform yourself overnight, but you can change your direction today. And when you're facing the right way, those small steps will carry you all the way to your destination. I often give my students this challenge: pick the smallest possible action you can do every single day to move closer to your goal. Don't choose something huge. The trick is to choose something so small, you can't make an excuse not to do it. Once you've done it consistently for 30 days, it'll feel natural, like brushing your teeth, and from there, you can slowly increase the difficulty. The interesting thing is, every time you complete that small action, you feel a tiny spark of pride. It's like placing another brick in the house of your new self. And when that house is sturdy enough, you won't ever want to go back to the flimsy tent of your old self. I know many people in their 50s or 60s who've tried to change before and failed, so they're hesitant to start again. But the truth is, most failures happen because we try to change too fast and too much at once. Remember, a mighty oak tree starts from a tiny acorn, and it takes years to grow tall. You're no different. So this week, I want you to choose just one small action. It doesn't need to be perfect, just consistent. Because it's that consistency that will quietly replace your old self, not with a loud, dramatic leap, but with a steady, unshakable process. And one day, you'll look back and realize those little steps carried you farther than all the times you tried to take a giant jump. Rule 12. The art of rebirth. Have you ever felt like you're just living a rerun of yourself day after day? Have you ever asked yourself, maybe I'm too far gone to change? And what if I told you, no matter your age, you can still shed your old skin, like a snake leaving behind what no longer serves it, and step into an entirely new life? Would you believe me? I once had a friend named Arthur, 68 years old. He'd spent his whole life as a mechanical engineer, living by a strict routine. After retirement, he fell into a void. One day he told me, "I don't know who I am without my job." I said to him, "Maybe this isn't a loss. Maybe it's a chance to be reborn." Instead of clinging to his old role, Arthur decided to try photography, something he'd always been curious about, but never pursued. A year later, he held his first photo exhibition. He told me, "I've realized I'm not just an engineer. I'm anything I choose to become." The Stoics saw self-reinvention as a voluntary journey. They called it a voluntary death, the deliberate ending of an old self. Not a physical death, but the letting go of habits, beliefs, and ways of living that no longer serve your Growth. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What is no longer useful should be allowed to die, to make space for what is to come." Rebirth doesn't happen overnight. It begins with a firm decision that you will no longer live by your old script. You shed the skin that has grown rigid and stunted your growth. A snake doesn't mourn its old skin. It knows that holding on would only keep it from growing. We are no different. I once worked with Elaine, a 60-year-old who always described herself as not a creative person. After retiring, she felt restless and unmotivated. We started with one small shift. Each week, she tried a new activity, from cooking unusual dishes to taking a pottery class. 6 months later, she discovered a passion for painting. The day she sent me a photo of her first finished canvas, I asked, "Do you still believe you're not creative?" She laughed. "That woman doesn't exist anymore." Psychologists call this process identity reconstruction. When you try new experiences and change your behavior, your brain gradually reshapes your subconscious self-image. You don't just act differently, you truly become someone new. But to be reborn, you have to accept a truth. There will be discomfort, and sometimes loss. You may lose certain habits, relationships, or a sense of familiar safety. But like clearing out a room before renovation, you need to create space for the new to enter. The Stoics would tell you, don't fear losing things. Fear losing yourself. Because you were afraid to change. I often give my students this exercise. Write down 2 lists. The first, old self, is a list of habits, thoughts, or relationships that no longer fit who you want to be. The second, new self, describes the qualities and actions you want to embody. Each week, choose one item from the old self to let go of, and one from the new self to begin practicing. The beautiful thing is, when you reinvent yourself, you don't just gain new energy, you inspire the people around you. I've seen my students become guides for their children, grandchildren, and friends, not through empty advice, but through the living proof of their own transformation. Remember, you are not the final version of yourself. Every day, you can shed a layer of skin and reveal a self that is stronger, freer, and closer to the person you truly want to be. So this week, I want you to ask yourself, if today were the first day of a brand new life, how would I start? And then start, even if it's with one small action. Because the art of rebirth doesn't begin when everything is ready. It begins the moment you decide you will no longer be the old you.